Shenwu Yi's sword bends through space like phantom light, and Diane Gia's silver domain shatters around a woman made of glazed glass ice. 7 opponents would be easier to predict than one whose movements refuse to exist. Like and subscribe before the next sword finds its mark. 3. Shenwu Yi was using the recoil to float in the air. Then, she froze suddenly and spun around like a bent willow. Enveloped in dark red, profound light that resembled condensed blood, the Heartless sword stabbed toward the back of Diane Jiuzhi's neck like a stream of phantom light. Diane Jiuzhi instinctively turned around and swung his hand upward, creating a silver domain of destruction that instantly spread out and locked down the space Shenwu Yi existed in like a sky dome. There was a muffled explosion, and he saw her silhouette and aura being consumed by the destructive energies. At the same time, a cold chill touched the left side of his neck. Chiang. Although Diane Jiuzhi didn't use all of his strength, he had just launched an attack. Despite his protective, profound energy, Shenwu Yi's sword was able to pierce his flesh and drew a thin, disjointed arc of blood in the air. When Diane Jiuzhi hastily turned his head and looked, he saw a single bead of blood and the dark red sword that pierced the left side of his neck. However, he ultimately possessed 52 sexagenary years of knowledge and experience. A sufficient amount of profound Wei instinct had been engraved into his body long ago. The moment his spiritual senses locked onto Shenwu Yi once more, his body and power almost reacted before his thoughts. His left hand made a reverse grab for the sword, while his right arm spun his torso around and launched an upward palm strike. Kaboom! The power of Boundless was unquestionably forceful. Diane Jiuzhi had barely gathered any strength before launching the palm strike. Yet the attack still elicited a thunderclap and pushed away Shenwu Yi and the Heartless sword, both of which had not yet managed to slip away, instantly. Or did they? Once again, both the wielder and her weapon scattered into a shower of afterimages. Diane Jiuzhi's pupils contracted into pins. A familiar chill appeared behind him, and it was less than 1/3 of a meter away from his back. As he had literally just spun his body, he could not even perform an instinctual dodge or block. Kai! There was a ripping noise, and Diane Jiuzhi's snow-white outfit was cut open. At the same time, a red mark almost 1/3 of a meter long appeared on his back. It was almost deep enough to draw blood. Diane Jiuzhi's mind turned blank for a short period. It was like he had just encountered a phantom who shouldn't exist. His whole life, Diane Jiuzhi had accumulated experience and knowledge. He had fought countless battles and visited the endless fog dozens of times. He had also witnessed innumerable swift or unusual movement arts of the abyss. No matter how potent a movement art was, it must be fueled by profound energy, and it was always traceable in some way. Just the same, no matter how skillful a movement art was, there must be a lull after an instantaneous movement was performed, long or short. If the movement art was executed poorly or seen through by the opponent, then it was no different from giving the opponent a moderate opening. Shenwu Yi's movements were different, though. She had performed multiple instantaneous movements at this point, but not only were they untraceable, she hadn't paused even once throughout the fight. During the brief period when his mind turned blank, Shenwu Yi had landed a stab on his forehead. As shallow as the wound was, it knocked him backward and drew blood. Intense pain jolted him back to his senses. When his eyes regained their focus, Shenwu Yi's ice-cold eyes appeared right before him once more. Slap! Diane Jiuzhi's grab missed, and the sword that should have been coming toward him from the forward-left position suddenly and bizarrely appeared in his right flank position. This time, the sword was swinging like a whip and slapped him across the face. Just as before, the attack failed to deal a significant wound to Diane Jiuzhi. However, it was unbelievably loud, like the heaviest slap in the world, and it landed squarely on the utterly shocked and dazed face of the #1 Divine Son before everyone's eyes. Earlier, Diane Jiuzhi had given Shenwu Yi 10 breaths of unchallenged offense as a show of courtesy. Despite facing a storm of attacks, he had caught it all without taking a single injury. He looked strong and insurmountable, elegant and refined. But after that, Shenwu Yi launched 7 strikes and landed all of them. As intense pain seared him, Diane Jiuzhi came to the perfect realization that Shenwu Yi had been as lax and unserious as he when he was only guarding against her attacks. More accurately, she found it utterly beneath her to accept his act of courtesy. Diane Jiuzhi was hardly the only one who was stunned speechless. Dead silence hung outside the barrier like a suffocating blanket. The experts were all standing stiffly, like their souls had been sucked out of their bodies. At this point, there can be no doubt. Meng Conchen said in a somewhat calm voice. It definitely is. The exquisite, profound world. He finally understood why Shenwu Yanai had gone to the lengths she did to conceal Shenwu Yi, refusing to let anyone see her face for 2 whole decades. It was because the woman would stun the world the moment she revealed her actual ability, more so than even the child of darkness that won the abyssal monarch's attention, Pan Buang. At this point, Meng Jiangxi had figured out a little of what was happening on the battlefield. He asked uncertainly, her unnatural movements aren't caused by any movement art. It's a spatial curve caused by the exquisite profound world, right? Meng Conchen replied. Making contact with one exquisite profound world allows one to move seamlessly to the other 6 exquisite profound worlds. Therefore, being at the level of 7 profound means that she owns 7 portable spaces she can traverse anytime she wants. It was common knowledge that the only function of portable spaces was to store objects. Not even the powerful Divine Regents had ever thought of using it to perform spatial leaps. Space is the hardest power to grasp of them all, and yet she is using her 7 exquisite profound worlds like 7 fingers. Meng Conchen continued. The most shocking thing of them all, she is the only one who knows where her 7 exquisite profound worlds are located after she conceals them. She's performed multiple spatial curves at this point, and yet I wasn't able to detect any sign of the exquisite profound worlds at all. Meng Conchen exhaled silently before remarking, I did not think that there exists another junior who can so open my eyes besides Yuaner. Meng Jiangxi murmured, Am I right to say that Diane Jiuzhi is fighting only one Shenwu Yi, but it's like he's facing 7 of her at once? No. Yun Qi's gaze followed Shenwu Yi closely, not straying for even an instant during his speech. If he were really fighting against 7 opponents, he could at least detect all 7 people's presences and positions. But nothing about her movements is predictable. No amount of battle experience or knowledge is effective against her. If even the dreamless Divine Regent was this surprised, everyone else could only do worse. Diane Jia's sorry state was bare for all to see, but no one was ridiculing him or jeering at him. Diane Rahu's eyebrows were tightly knitted, and his eyes were shining with shock as well. That said, his aura was still steady. Shenwu Yi's bizarre spatial curves completely defied instinct and common sense. Forget Diane Jiuzhi, even he, the boundless Divine Regent, would be stumped for a while, assuming that he had never encountered it before. However, he was equally confident that Diane Jiuzhi would discover the best way to deal with this tactic as soon as he regained his cool. And it so happened that this method fell under his strongest expertise. Exquisite profound world spatial curve, Hua Kaye whispered the completely unfamiliar concept. The surprise on her face refused to fade for a long time. Hua Fuchen sighed. Forget you, this is the first time I've witnessed something like this. In that case, can Shenwu Yi actually defeat the boundless Divine Sun? Hua Kaye could not help but say this expectantly. Hua Fuchen knew what she was thinking, of course. Still, he shook his head slowly and said, if their cultivation levels were the same, then there would be almost no chance for him to defeat Shenwu Yi even if he held the absolute advantage in terms of profound vein, body, and knowledge in the profound way. He said almost, not absolutely. It was because he was well aware of how powerful the divine vein of great rage was. However, cultivation is an insurmountable gap, not to mention that this battlefield is only 30 kilometers wide. Hua Fuchen declared a conclusion that, to his knowledge and experience as a Divine Regent, was irrefutable one. Diane Jiuzhi only needs to employ one method to cement her defeat. I know, he just needs to ignore everything she does and defeat her with sheer brute force. Hua Kaye's expectation dimmed considerably after she thought she figured out the trick. Then she unconsciously and involuntarily snuck a glance at Yun Qi. Before this, Yun Qi could always sense her gaze. He would instantly return her gaze or curl up the corners of his lips slightly in response. He never failed to make her feel happy, and her heart pounded in elation. This time, though, Yun Qi's gaze was focused entirely on the eternal night divine daughter with a ruinous countenance and a succubus form. His gaze chased her every move as if he were afraid of missing even an instant of her poise. His eyes shone with familiar brightness and clarity, but for some reason, Hua Kaye thought they hid a layer of invisible mist. It made his gaze look obsessed and misty to the point where it could not tolerate any other scenery. Not to mention that he completely failed to sense or respond to her gaze despite how long she had been looking at him. For a time, Hua Kaye was stunned. She completely lost interest in the fight as an exceedingly unfamiliar sense of unease and emptiness began to fill up her heart. Moreover, it looks like Shenwu Yi is manipulating her exquisite, profound worlds like her own limbs, but it's not as easy as it seems. Hua Kaye observed the battlefield with sword-like clarity. Her aura is clearly weaker after executing multiple spatial curves in a row. It is the power of space. Maintaining the exquisite, profound worlds must come at a gigantic cost. But whatever the outcome may be, this duel, and especially the emergence of the exquisite, profound worlds, will surely enter the history books of the abyss. Thang! Hua Kaye had just finished saying this when a heavy, deafening clang came from inside the barrier. After taking 17 hits in a row, Diane Jiuzhi finally recovered from his daze and unleashed a thick aura of profound light that looked as dense as crystal. It was at least a meter thick, and repelled the Heartless sword when it was about 2/3 of a meter away from him. Even Shenwu Yi herself abruptly jumped away from Diane Jiuzhi and hovered in the air, halting her relentless assault completely. By now, Diane Jiuzhi's white shirt was torn in several places, and his exposed skin showed wounds of varying depths. Even his face was covered in several bloody gashes. His eyes, however, were unnaturally calm and cold. He had forcefully removed the shock and panic brought by the illogical, exquisite, profound world, his arrogance, and his gentle nature from his person, leaving behind only the master of his arts. He stopped holding back and unleashed the power of great rage in full, shaking the space around him. Dian Rahu's complexion didn't change, but the mild tension that had gripped his body until now vanished entirely. I have never witnessed or heard such a movement art. My horizons are greatly broadened today. Even his voice sounded dramatically different from normal, imposing and powerful. If our cultivation levels were the same, then you may have defeated me easily. But for this bout, I shall employ my unfair advantage to win. Despite the blood and gashes on his face, Diane Jiuzhi looked every bit the #1 divine son he was, considering his appearance and spiritual pressure. Once he was done speaking, he launched an all-out attack that consumed an insane amount of profound energy. The power of great rage instantly blotted out the sky and enveloped the 30-kilometer space in front of him like a tidal storm that had appeared out of nowhere. There was no doubt about it. He was going to defeat Shenwu Yi's impossible technique with sheer power. Shenwu Yi covered herself with her sword and switched to defense, but the power of great rage was such that she was still blasted several kilometers away like a lone boat that was tossed helplessly by the storm before she was able to steady her form. Even so, she was being pushed back rapidly. It wasn't until she was less than 300 meters away from the barrier that she finally found the leeway to launch a counterattack of her own. In her left hand, the heartbreak sting suddenly left her hand and shot toward Diane Jiuzhi's forehead against the tidal wave of energy. Wherever it went, it let out an ear-piercing shrill that caused everyone's heart to skip a bit. The power of great rage could not completely stop it in its tracks, but it stripped it of its speed and strength layer by layer. Diane Jiuzhi did not withdraw his power to defend against the counterattack. Instead, he tapped his foot and casually shifted past 10 positions and watched the heartbreak sting still following its original trajectory and stabbing into his original position out of the corner of his eye. Right before the sting would make contact, it suddenly disappeared amidst a flash of light. By the time Diane Jiuzhi's pupils contracted slightly, the dangerous screech sounded right next to his ears. Bang! Blood mixed with countless bits of flesh spilled through the air. The anomalously disappearing, heartbreak sting had reappeared behind Diane Jiuzhi's defenseless back and slammed into his spine. What? Dian Rahu had just relaxed for half a breath when the shocked cry escaped his lips. His eyes especially widened so much that they threatened to rip apart at the corners. The heartbreak sting, a divine children armament, could be spatially curved through the exquisite, profound world as well. The scene did not just stun the Divine Regents. Even the chief priest's eyebrows had visibly twitched at the unexpected turn of events. The shock Diane Jiuzhi just forced down battered his mental defenses once more. During that instant loss of concentration, a blur covered his vision, and the woman he had nearly driven all the way to the edge of the battlefield reappeared right before his eyes. She was aiming straight for his heart. Thang! Diane Jiuzhi's back might be defenseless, but his front was full of power. The pain stabbing his soul cleared his mind way faster than last time as he clenched his teeth a little and muttered under his breath, "Boundless manifestation, master of all martial arts. Ha!" Thick silver radiance burst out of his body and blazed like a silver inferno. As his arm moved, the silver light transformed into a 300-meter-long sword that horizontally cut the space in front of him. BOOOMMM. The 300-meter-long sword unleashed a sword projection that was over 30 kilometers long. It engulfed every inch of space within the barrier. In fact, the barrier was the only reason it did not slice off half of Eden's crown. Shenwu Yi disappeared and reappeared 3,000 meters above ground. The heartbreak sting had also returned to her hand before shooting out once more. Following an unpredictable trajectory, the human and the sting attacked Diane Jiuzhi from the front and the back simultaneously. However, Diane Jiuzhi closed his eyes directly and concentrated his spiritual senses on himself. In fact, he stopped perceiving Shenwu Yi altogether. His grip shifted a little, and the silver light took on the shape of a giant halberd instead. The giant halberd was descending from above. Soon, the power of the Great Rage would engulf the entirety of the battlefield. It would cover every blind spot, even himself, to fight strength with strength, to trade wound for wound. Considering the absolute advantage he held in terms of cultivation level and physical prowess, and considering the fact that the battlefield was an enclosed space merely 30 kilometers wide, there was zero chance Diane Jiuzhi could be defeated. Yun Qi's fingers clenched tightly. It is an unfair win, all right, Meng Kunchen sighed. However, it is the best way to deal with this tactic. Shenwu Yi abruptly stopped in her tracks. It was because she realized instantly that the resulting explosion would engulf the entire battlefield. She could possess an infinite amount of exquisite, profound worlds, and she still wouldn't be able to find a safe space in this enclosed battlefield. BOOOMMM. Silver light illuminated the sky and space shuddered violently. This wasn't just the power of the #1 divine sun, it was the most forceful power there existed in the abyss. Everyone knew about Diane Jiuzhi and his divine vein of great rage, but few had ever witnessed, much less experienced, the man going all out. For a time, every profound practitioner in the temple felt chilled to the core. Those at the same cultivation level as Diane Jiuzhi, especially, blanched. They could hardly believe that the power had been unleashed by a peer in terms of cultivation. Isn't this a little too brutal? Xianxia could not help but speak up in a low tone. Shenwu Yi is 2 cultivation levels below him. This level of power will probably injure her. Xianxua's voice suddenly became caught in his throat as he looked up into the sky, eyes dazed. He could not say anything for a very long time. As the silver light waned, Diane Jiuzhi slowly lowered his arm. It was at the halfway position when suddenly his movement stiffened, his eyes opened wide as saucers. He, too, was looking up into the sky. High in the sky, a black figure stood tall with fluttering clothes. The pair of beautiful eyes looking down at the earth looked as cold and indifferent as before, as if they were made from ice. Shenwu Yi was completely unharmed. No matter how mentally robust Diane Jiuzhi was, he could not help but be stupefied by this outcome yet again. Outside the barrier, the crowd fell into a dumb and stupefied trance as well. The exquisite, profound world wasn't something that could be dealt with using common sense. That was why everyone could tell that Diane Jiuzhi had more or less gone all out. The power of great rage was indescribably potent and terrifying. Faced against such power, Shenwu Yi should have been injured even if she defended against it with all her might at first notice. If not severely injured. The one scenario that could not have happened was for her to be perfectly unharmed. Yun Qi's vision blurred for an instant as he looked up at the fairy-like figure in the sky. When his vision regained its clarity, he thought he saw what looked like an odd refracted ray of light about 1.5 meters in front of Shenwu Yi. It was ice. The chief priest stiffened for an instant. It was only an instant, but it caused the man standing behind him, Dong Huang, to lift his head abruptly. Heart beating wildly, he asked, "Master, why?" A long silence followed. It lasted a few breaths straight before the chief priest finally said a few words. "Glazed glass ice." Dong Huang did not understand. For the first time, the man who never looked up to anyone besides the abyssal monarch arched his head and stared at the woman standing high up in the sky. Exquisite, profound world, glazed glass ice. This woman, she's an ice heart 9 profound. Ice heart 9 profound? Dong Huang was only more confused. 1. You think Shenwu Yanai would let Shenwu Yi enter the battlefield knowing that she can't win? I swear, sometimes this just doesn't make sense. The chief priest eventually shifted his gaze away and looked at the abyssal monarch. He asked him via sound transmission, "Monarch, it is colorless and flawless, pure and clean to the extreme. It can only be the glazed glass ice." However, the glazed glass ice disappeared a long time ago. It can never reappear. Could I be wrong? The chief priest was questioning himself, a man whose knowledge and experience were unfathomable. The abyssal monarch replied, "This woman possesses the 9 profound exquisite body and the heart of snow-glazed glass. Her 9 profound has matured, and her glazed glass has bloomed. That is how her exquisite profound worlds and glazed glass ice came to be." The chief priest fell silent for a long time before asking, "But how?" "I do not know. There is no need to know." The oddities regarding Shenwu Yi were world-shattering, to put it mildly, and yet the abyssal monarch's reply was overflowing with inexplicable indifference. Still, the chief priest did not ask further. A causeless person. The thought surfaced in the abyssal monarch's mind before he carelessly wiped it away and returned to indifference. More and more people noticed the strange, icy light shining around Shenwu Yi. As the light kept refracting, they eventually realized that it was a protective barrier of some sort. It gave off a faint trace of ice, but the icy light it exuded looked like nothing they had ever seen. Instead, it was transparent to the point of being colorless and invisible. Ice? Meng Jiangxi looked completely confused. None of the profound arts practiced by the eternal Night Kingdom of God involves ice, and the profound light emitted by an icy aura is varying degrees of blue, right? Why is this ice completely transparent? Meng Kongchen did not answer because he had never seen such an icy aura himself. He especially did not understand how such a weak ice barrier was able to block Diane Gia's power of great rage. Yun Qi looked up into the sky with a deep frown on his face. Ice. Is it the Ice Phoenix God investiture canon she used to practice? No, that's completely wrong. Besides, why is it colorless? Natural ice was colorless, but the ice energy created from profound energy emitted a blue light. This was common knowledge. As the greatest master of ice profound energy of the universe, Yun Qi knew this better than anyone. The ice blue color that everyone knew about in the profound way was the natural effect of ice profound energy. That was why there had never been any record of a colorless profound ice. Pale flame, glazed glass ice. Suddenly, a whisper appeared in Yun Qi's soul sea. Yun Qi withdrew his thoughts and asked, "What did you say?" Li Xiu took her time to tidy the memory fragments that were triggered before answering very, very slowly. When the ancestral God created the universe, she left behind 3 tribulations and 3 boons. One of the 3 tribulations is the fiercest fire, the pale flame, and one of the 3 boons is the cleanest water, the glazed glass ice. 3 tribulations and 3 boons. It was something Yun Qi had never heard, and a concept that no longer existed in any known record. It was because their existences dated back to a time when the god race and the devil race weren't fully formed yet. The pale flame, the fiercest fire in the universe, could burn through space and scorch a god's body until it broke. Pale white in color, anyone who touches it would turn to ash. Nixuan ultimately extinguished this tribulation, and an indestructible origin seed was left behind. At first, Nixuan tried to master the power. However, his efforts ended in failure. So he had no choice but to break it down into 3 fragments using the most extreme power of the creation god of elements. He later gifted these 3 fragments to the 3 beast races, and they are the vermilion bird, the phoenix, and the golden crow. The revelation struck a chord with Yun Qi. The vermilion bird, the phoenix, and the golden crow. They were the names of the famous 3 supreme fire attribute beasts of the era of gods. No wonder the 3 beast races respected Nixuan so much. During the karmic balancing at the very beginning of the universe, the cleanest boon that stands opposed to the fiercest tribulation is the glazed glass ice. The glazed glass ice is absolutely clean, pure, colorless, and flawless. It is the ancestral god's gift to the universe when she first created it. It could illuminate and purify all filthy and tainted objects in the universe. The source of the glazed glass ice is the glazed glass divine aura that roams the universe. It can bless a newborn girl with the heart of snow-glazed glass. When the heart has reached full maturity, it will form the glazed glass ice. A woman of glazed glass could perceive good or evil with their heart and discern truth and falsehoods with their eyes. Their body, soul, and aura are all flawless and pure. If she is near the heavenly law, it would grant her its protection. If she is near profound energy, it could not bear to harm her. If she is near sin, sin would naturally feel guilty and ashamed. However, Li Xiu's tone changed into one of regret. This particular boon had permanently disappeared before the fiercest tribulation. Why's that? Li Xiu explained. The gods created life, and life filled countless worlds. However, this also gave rise to endless malice, greed, desire, and slaughter. It all turned into countless layers of dirty dust that enveloped heaven and earth. The filth and dust that even the ancestral god failed to predict contaminated the universe's aura layer by layer. Over time, more and more of the glazed glass divine aura was eroded and destroyed until only wisps of it remained. Today, they could only be found deep within the primordial energy where all things began. The universe could not return to what it was before once the contamination passed a certain threshold. Although women with the heart of snow-glazed glass still appeared every once in a while thanks to the divine aura's blessing, they could no longer form the glazed glass ice and become true women of glazed glass. As they grew up in a contaminated universe, they would lose even their heart of snow-glazed glass and revert to mundane women. Xianxia patiently and quietly listened to Li Xiu's explanation until the end. It was only now he asked, "So, you're saying that the colorless ice she's using is the glazed glass ice?" Li Xiu answered, "Its color, shape, and aura all match what I know, but there is a huge discrepancy." "How so?" "The ice may be glazed glass ice, but her aura does not belong to that of a woman of glazed glass at all." Naturally, Xianxia could not fully understand her words. He asked urgently, "She does possess the one and only heart of snow-glazed glass in the entire world, but didn't you say that the glazed glass ice cannot reappear anymore? Besides, the world back then cannot possibly be more filthy and tainted than the abyss." Li Xiu fell silent for a moment. She was searching for the blurry memory fragments she had recently awakened. To Xianxia's surprise, she was able to give him a somewhat clear answer. "There is one possibility. She has the ancestral god's sacred aura on her, and she is a causeless person." "Xianxia, what do you mean by causeless?" Li Xiu replied, "She did not come to be naturally. Excluding the 4 creation gods and 4 devil emperors, she is the 9th living being to be created by the ancestral god herself. The creation gods and the devil emperors were all created for a reason, and she is no exception." Xianxia's heartstrings shook uncontrollably for a few breaths. The god realm and the abyss were 2 isolated universes. When she fell into the abyss, the karmic bond between you two was completely severed. Combined with the fact that she lost her memories, her existence, no longer as a cause. As a result, she became a pure, causeless person who should not exist in the universe's concept or laws. Perhaps this purity that transcends even concepts and laws is why her heart of snow-glazed glass is able to bloom and form the glazed glass ice. This was her guess. This was also the only possibility she could think of after searching through everything she knew as a creation god. Cries of surprise and puzzlement rang out here and there, but no one could say the name, glazed glass ice. It was because this concept did not exist among the 6 kingdoms of gods. Looking up at the black, fairy-like figure, Diane Jiuzhi once again felt an inexplicable sense of shame and self-abasement. The emotions were rapidly flooding over his mind like tidal water. So he had no choice but to look away, push away the stray thoughts, and resummon the silver radiance that had just waned. This time he created a giant silver bow and drew it. It looked like a full moon at full draw. When he released the bowstring, silver arrows filled the sky and enveloped the entire battlefield like a hanging river, covering every inch of blind spot. Shenwu Yi did not move from her position. She simply swung the Heartless sword like a cloud brushing against the sleeve. This time, everyone saw as clear as day that a layer of colorless ice had encompassed her blade. Its crystalline light was pure, cold, and sharp. Just when everyone thought that Shenwu Yi would evade at full force using her exquisite, profound worlds, she swung her ice-encased sword at the sea of silver light arrows shooting toward her. Ding! The icy crystal made contact with the first light arrow, but instead of the devastating explosion of the divine vein of great rage, it clinked like jadites smacking into one another. When the icy light flashed, the exceedingly volatile arrow aimed at her heart actually shifted off course and flew past her torso. It wasn't until it struck the barrier at the edge of the battlefield that it finally unleashed its destructive light and power. Dian Rahu's eyes were as wide as bells at this point. He cared little about controlling his expression in the first place, and right now every inch of his face was arranged into a look of utter shock. He was the bearer of the greatest boundless divine power in the world, and he had practiced the boundless manifestation art for over 20,000 years. However, he never knew that the power could be so tame. The second arrow followed right after the first and clashed against the ice-encased blade once more. Just like before, the contact only elicited a soft clink, and the light arrow was parried just like that. The third, fourth, 10th, 100th, 1000th arrow came, and still Shenwu Yi parried them all. Clink, 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 clink. Her form was divine, and her sword dance was exquisite. The mixture of silver and icy lights looked like a phantasmal cloud that naturally surrounded her person. It was such that the stunned gazes of the crowd gradually transformed into dreamlike infatuation. Boom, 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 boom. In the end, the last light arrow too struck the barrier and unleashed a devastating silver explosion that scorched the sky. It clearly illuminated Shenwu Yi's spotless clothes and unblemished face. Throughout the attack, Diane Jiuzhi's arms remained exactly where they were. He did not move even after the silver light had faded entirely. Everything that had happened today was too illusory and ludicrous. Again and again, shock had overwhelmed him, and his common sense was crushed to smithereens. At this point, his shock and confusion could no longer be quelled by mere reason. "What demonic art is this?" a boundless elder murmured unconsciously. This was a man of unimaginable power and influence, and yet he had said something utterly ridiculous. That was just how shocked he was. Shenwu Yi did not give Diane Jiuzhi any time to recover his senses. After she was done parrying the attack, she drew what looked like a profound seal with her sword. It was only about 1/3 of a meter long, but it gave off an intimidating aura as it rapidly took form. The Purify God seal? Meng Jiangxi let out a low cry. Yun Qi was well aware of the Purify God seal. It was the eternal night kingdom of God's strongest and most critical profound art. The profound practitioner would be able to create 7 great profound seals in total as they progressed through the profound art. They were break the delusion, overcome the misfortune, remove the dust, cleanse the heart, still the soul, trace the light, and finally, the seal that only a divine regent could manifest, the Shenwu World Purifying Seal. Shenwu Qing never earned the qualification to cultivate the Purify God seal until she died, and Shenwu Yi did it in just 20 years. SSS. Meng Jiangxi sucked in a cold breath before continuing. Then again, compared to the exquisite profound world and the strange ice, this much is nothing. I wonder which level she's at, though. Wait a second. Why is her Purify God seal colorless? The profound seal Shenwu Yi was carving was crimson at first, but the color gradually faded away as the icy light flickered. When the seal was fully formed, it looked pure, limpid, and perfectly transparent. The Heartless sword swung, and the transparent profound seal descended toward Dian Jiuzhi. Most people recognized it as the first seal, break the delusion. However, it was also massively different from the one they knew. It was because the colorless, icy light had completely overwritten Shenwu's powerful energy. The icy profound crystal emitted the presence of a 6th-level divine extinction realm. Normally, it was of no threat to Diane Jiuzhi. However, after all the lessons he had received, Diane Jiuzhi decided to take the attack seriously. He split his power of great rage into 2. 1/5 of his power was used for defense, while 4/5 was used for offense. The moment he lifted his arm, his silver light transformed into a massive 300-meter-long whip. The moment he swung it, it would whip up a titanic storm that engulfed dozens of kilometers at once. In other words, the storm of destruction would envelop the entire battlefield. He really wanted to know how Shenwu Yi would dodge this one. The icy profound seal moved really, really fast. Diane Jiuzhi's force field slowed it down a little, but that was all it did before it struck him directly. Diane Jiuzhi trusted his defenses to hold as he prepared to unleash his own attack. However, his protective profound energy had just burst into life when it suddenly dimmed without warning. Bang! The icy seal exploded, and Diane Jiuzhi's movement stiffened. His complexion had changed dramatically as well. He felt a piercing cold exploding across his right chest before invading his body. He felt as if billions of icy needles had stabbed into his flesh, blood, and veins. It instantly numbed his right arm and froze nearly half of his surging profound energy. Diane Jiuzhi did not swing the long whip he conjured. Instead, he slowly looked down at his right chest with a stupefied expression. His protective profound energy was still shimmering on his torso. It hadn't crumbled at all. During that brief instant of shock, cold air hit him from above. Then the second seal, overcome the misfortune, crashed against his head with twice as much power and light as before. If she is near the heavenly law, it would grant her its protection. If she is near profound energy, it could not bear to harm her. If she is near sin, sin would naturally feel guilty and ashamed. Li Xiu's words reverberated inside Yun Qi's soul sea. He was watching it right now. Be it destructive or defensive profound energy, the glazed glass ice had tamed them all. A halberd, the profound energy phenomenon created by the glazed glass ice, was, in fact, not unfamiliar to Yun Qi. As the bearer of the original dragon god bloodline, he was the absolute bane of all existing dragons. His soul did not just terrify the dragons. Any power they flung his way would shrink of its own accord. In the god realm, the late Long Bai was the possessor of the dragon god bloodline and the supreme overlord of primal chaos. However, the dragon's attacks were weakened by 1/3 before they even got close to him. The outcome produced by the glazed glass ice was similar, but the nature was completely different. The glazed glass ice did not cause profound energy to cower or wane. Instead, it was as if the profound energy gained some sort of sentience and chose to avoid the glazed glass ice, unwilling to damage it or block its way. The glazed glass ice itself wasn't strong, but its origin, exceedingly special and pure way conceptually, diminished another person's strength to an incredible degree. It allowed Shenwu Yi, a 6th-level Divine Extinction Realm profound practitioner, to easily defend against the power of level 8 Divine Extinction Realm Great Rage and pierce Diane Jiuzhi's defenses. It was all because the Divine Sun's profound energy had suddenly become lazy. Yun Qi whispered, "So this is the true face of the heart of snow-glazed glass." Just like the 9 profound exquisite body, he had learned about the heart of snow-glazed glass a long time ago. Rumors and records regarding the heart were numerous and disorderly. Generally speaking, everyone agreed that a person born with the heart of snow-glazed glass possessed a transparent heart and soul and was protected by the heavenly laws. When they awakened, they would definitely become a sovereign of some sort. It was also agreed that they possessed powerful fates. Out of the many commonly agreed-upon theories, the protection of the heavenly law was the most popular of them all. Some people believed it with all their heart, and some people disregarded it completely. These rumors and records were the sum of all special characteristics every person with the heart of snow-glazed glass had ever displayed throughout history. However, no one knew where the heart of snow-glazed glass originated from or why it was named glazed glass. None of the records ever mentioned anything like that. It wasn't until now that he discovered the truth. No one ever knew about its true essence, because said essence had been wiped out by the dirty dust of the mortal coil even before the era of gods had truly arrived. Her exquisite body and glazed glass heart had explicit expressions in her original world. They allowed her to overcome laws, see through the dangerous jungle of a person's heart, and plan the bigger picture, even though her knowledge and experience were exceedingly shallow compared to her peers. However, neither quality had fully explained why the exquisite body was exquisite, or why the glazed glass heart was named glazed glass. To think that it was because both qualities were just sprouts when she was still in the god realm. But why did this happen? How did this happen? What happened to her during the decades she fell into the abyss? How on earth did she undergo such a dramatic change? A being created by the ancestral god. The ancestral god's holy aura? A causeless person. Isolated from her original universe and severed from karma forever, she was no longer an artifact of fate. She no longer had any past or her previous memories. Is she still herself then? Should I call her Shenwu Yi as she is now, or should I, selfishly, remind her of the name Xia Qingyu and drag her back to her old fate? Diane Gia's response to the second glazed glass profound seal was to make a grab for it. He seemed to be trying to prove something. The glazed glass profound seal wasn't spatially curved. It slammed directly against Diane Jiuzhi's arm. There was an icy explosion, and the glazed glass profound seal shattered to smithereens. However, the terrible cold still invaded his marrow, froze the blood in his arm, and condensed his profound qi. As a result, he could not move the limb for a time. This time, though, Diane Jiuzhi clearly sensed that his power of great rage had blocked only about half of the attack, an attack at only the 6th level of the Divine Extinction Realm. His extraordinarily powerful body had also become frozen, as if it had lost most of its natural instinct to reject foreign forces. It had become so lazy that it allowed the cold energy to invade as it pleased. The endless wave of absurdity just kept stacking up inside his soul sea. The world inside the barrier felt like a bizarre and fantastical dream. A sharp, cold light stabbed his eyes once more. Shenwu Yi had conjured her third glazed glass profound seal while he was distracted. Brimming with the immense power of Remove the Dust, the 3-meter-wide seal enveloped everything within a 3-kilometer radius with icy power. Dian Jiuzhi closed his eyes. In fact, he sealed off all 5 of his senses. The attack could not be dodged, perceived, or blocked. In that case, he shall not see, hear, or feel. This way, he would not feel pain, surprise, or fear. He had already made a fool of himself. He would not allow the boundless kingdom of God's dignity to be trampled as well. Bang! The power of great rage surged out like a flood, bursting the blood vessels of his arms and breaking the skin and flesh. It had penetrated his frozen arms almost cruelly. The silver light that dimmed just a moment ago also swelled like a silver sun and enveloped his whole body. The glazed glass, removed the dust, seal descended from the sky and sealed off the space he was in. However, Dian Jiuzhi could not feel it as he was currently senseless. His rampaging power of great rage morphed into a massive shadow that was a little over 30 meters tall. However, the spiritual pressure it unleashed could not be outmatched even by a 30-kilometer-tall mountain of mountains. Bang! The next moment, Remove the Dust crashed down on Dian Jiuzhi like a meteor from the beyond. Affected by translucent ice, strange ripples washed across the surface of the thick silver light like neatly cut water. When Remove the Dust passed through the silver light, the intensity of its icy light had only diminished by 60%. The rest struck Dian Jiuzhi's body and exploded violently. Icy light bloomed amid the silver radiance, distorting it significantly. The freezing of profound energy caused the 30-meter-tall shadow to shrink to just 21 meters. This time, the ice did not just freeze the bones, but also the soul. It no longer surprised Dian Jiuzhi or caused him to recoil, though. He did not even bother to dispel the cold energy. Still keeping his 5 senses sealed, the 21-meter-tall shadow punched upward with the rampant power of the divine vein of great rage. Boundless manifestation. Great rage consumes the star. B-O-O-O. Silver light enveloped the sky. At that moment, not even the barrier was able to isolate the destructive blaze of destruction that illuminated the entire Eden's crown. Cries of surprise filled the temple as Xianxia's gaze sharpened. He clearly saw a 3-meter-wide gap embedded in the middle of the sky of destructive silver. It shimmered like pure, flawless ice, keeping Shenwu Yi untouched. Wherever the raging torrent of destruction made contact with the icy light, it automatically transformed into gentle, harmless beams that circled it. Not a single wisp could make an entry. 1 breath, 2 breaths, 3 breaths. The power was great enough to destroy heaven and earth, and yet it just could not break or even damage the fragile crystal. As the silver light waned, the battlefield was revealed once more. Everyone saw Shenwu Yi create ice with her sword and weave a profound seal resembling 4 leaves. As soon as the seal took form, it immediately shed all of its color and became perfectly transparent. Cleanse the heart! SSS. Just how far into the Shenwu world Purifying seal is she? Meng Jiangxi exclaimed in shock. At the same time, the temporarily resting power of great rage exploded once more. In fact, it seemed more berserk than before. The silver light tangled around Dian Jiuzhi's body looked like waves of roaring thunder or raging sea. His power detonated at the same time Cleanse the heart descended. He chanted words that came from his soul sea, and only he himself could hear clearly, boundless manifestation. Ruin of rage crushes the sea. The instant the power of great rage surged, the space within the barrier and even the gazes cast into it were warped instantly. The Purify God seal and the power of great rage engulfed their targets at nearly the same time. Icy explosions echoed inside Dian Jiuzhi's soul sea, and he could clearly sense that his soul had become as cold as his body. His profound energy was also flowing unbelievably slowly and stutteringly, as if it was impeded by countless layers of ice. Still, he did not release his 5 senses and check out his physical wounds. Instead, he gathered all of his concentration and focused on channeling the power residing within his divine vein of great rage. 8th-level Divine Extinction Realm versus 6th-level Divine Extinction Realm. Even if he was going to lose, he wasn't going down in an ugly fashion. Uglier than it already was anyway. The wavy, destructive power annihilated everything within the barrier. The space of Eden's crown was impossibly resilient, and yet shallow marks were appearing here and there as if it was threatening to break apart. As the power covered the whole battlefield, it did not matter where Shenwu Yi was standing. Just like before, the waves of destruction suddenly split apart like cut water as soon as they made contact with the icy, glazed glass crystal. Ice was spreading across Diane Jiuzhi's body, and it was only growing thicker over time. His face was rapidly losing its color as well. However, for the first time, Shenwu Yi's glazed glass barrier lost its perfect tranquility. Cracks could be seen forming on it. Although the cracks were minor at best, they were all the more conspicuous due to how excessively flawless the crystal was. Shenwu Yi's expression did not change. Deeper light shone out of her icy pupils, and the cracks on the glazed glass crystal began healing, only to spread open again. It looked as if a temporary balance was achieved. The silver light dimmed once more, and the waves of destruction began receding. It was at this moment that Dian Jiuzhi slowly raised his right arm. His movements were clearly stiff and painful, and the fading silver light abruptly swelled to full intensity once more. When he punched the ground with his right arm, his body, the power of the previous skill still flowing out of him, unleashed a level of destructive power that wasn't inferior to his previous showing in the slightest. Boundless manifestation. 8 rages shatter the realm? At that moment, space shuddered violently, and silver light filled every inch of the sky. It looked as if heaven and earth had been flipped upside down, as an endless amount of power of great rage flooded out of Dian Jiuzhi's body. The icy cracks that had almost entirely disappeared from the glazed glass barrier abruptly split wide open and spread to most of the barrier. Then they slowly grew unstoppable until they encompassed the entire crystal. 1 breath, 2 breaths, 3 breaths, 4 breaths, 5 breaths, plink. The silver light finally faded, but just before it did, the mysterious glazed glass barrier shattered as well. As the final wisp of power of great rage swept across Shenwu Yi, her healthy complexion instantly turned white, and a thin stream of blood trickled down the corner of her lips. However, that was all. The next moment, 10,000 ancient eras worth of cold gathered inside her eyes. Shenwu Yi thrust the heartbreak sting forward and unleashed a burst of colorless ice. Countless icy petals took form as it shot through the air. By the time it approached Dian Jiuzhi, it had transformed into a fantastical icy snow lotus in full bloom. The snow lotus of ice exploded against Dian Jiuzhi's body and sent icy crystals flying all over the place. The light they refracted looked gorgeous beyond words. Dian Jiuzhi was in the middle of forcing out the power of great rage once more when his body suddenly stiffened, and the beating silver light giving its all to last just a little longer froze in place, then winked out like a mirage and died completely. It was a frozen hell inside Dian Jiuzhi's soul sea. Wherever he probed, he could only find endless cold. He struggled with all of his willpower again and again, but in the end he let out a quiet sigh. So be it. As soon as his 5 senses returned to normal, he fell backward like a mindless ice sculpture and hit the ground with a heavy thud. It was dead silent throughout Eden's crown. His flesh, blood, marrow, and even profound energy were frozen solid. It numbed him from the pain and even the existence of his physical body. Amidst the frozen nothingness, only one last sliver of clarity remained. He did not allow his mind to slip into unconsciousness, however. Instead, he opened his frozen lips and voiced out as clearly as he could, "I surrender one." Shenwu Yi quietly put away the heartless sword and the heartbreak sting. The thin stream of blood coloring the corner of her lips was soundlessly wiped away as well. The chief priest's announcement followed right after. Dian Jiuzhi of boundless surrenders. Shenwu Yi of eternal night wins. Rumble. Throwing all caution to the wind, Dian Rahu leaped into the barrier with a thunderous boom and held up the frozen Dian Jiuzhi. Then, he enveloped the man's whole body with thick, warm waves of profound energy that swiftly dispelled the cold. "Brother Jiuzhi?" Dian Sansi's face was deathly pale. His foot kept moving forward and backward, and he fought against the impulse to join his father. Dian Jiuzhi had lost. Despite his absolute advantage in cultivation, age, and physical strength, he had lost. It was an outcome that too many people could not imagine, even in their dreams. Judging from Dian Rahu's shocked expression, Dian Jiuzhi hadn't just lost. He had suffered a significant amount of injury. That said, many people lamented, but no one laughed at his defeat. Shenwu Yi's exquisite, profound worlds and strange ice crystal were both things that ripped common sense to shreds. So as shocking as Dian Jiuzhi's defeat was, it wasn't undeserved. One thing was sure. The #1 divine son of Abyss was no more after this battle. Instead, the name of the eternal night divine daughter replaced it. From now on, it would live in everyone's memory, heart, and soul as a brand. Ha 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 ha. Ha 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 ha. Hoarse, insane laughter suddenly erupted out of nowhere and stabbed into everyone's eardrums like countless poison needles. It pierced the ears and shook the soul. This is the so-called #1 divine son. This is the so-called divine vein of great rage. He's an 8th-level divine extinction realm profound practitioner, and yet he lost to my 6th-level divine extinction realm divine daughter like a frozen dog. What a joke. Ha 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 ha. No one present would choose this moment to taunt the boundless kingdom of God, nor would any divine regent deign to make such a venomous and lowly insult. No one except the lightless divine regent of the eternal night kingdom of God. Her vile laughter and taunt were, to be fair, completely expected. If he were any other divine regent, they most likely would choose to restrain their temper and not stoop to the level of a madwoman. However, he was the boundless divine regent, the most fiery of them all. After lifting Diane Rahu to a sitting position, Diane Rahu abruptly glared in the lightless divine regent's direction and erupted. Silence! Ha 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 ha! Shenwu Yi continued to laugh, though, and each bark was only shriller and more soul-rending than the last. What a boundless divine son! Just a while ago, he dared to give 10 breaths to his opponent, so I thought he must be oh so capable. But no, he is just a useless, ugly piece of garbage whose true self is exposed as soon as he encounters the slightest bit of resistance. You are the man who raised this laughable idiot who shamed himself and his kingdom, Diane Rahu, so who are you to bark at me? Bang! Blue veins bulged big and scary on Diane Rahu's arms, and his eyes looked like they would explode with berserking fury at any moment. However, this was the Pure Land. As angry as he was, he ultimately chose to push down his anger. Besides, the loser should calmly accept the shame that came with defeat. That was how he taught Dian Jiuzhi. The boundless divine regent's endurance did not earn the lightless divine regent's restraint. Sudden movement came from the pitch-black palanquin she was sitting in, and a wisp of profound energy shot out. Amidst everyone's shocked and puzzled gazes, the profound energy penetrated the barrier and struck Shenwu Yi squarely. There was a boom, and Shenwu Yi was sent flying at least 100 meters before she arrested herself. Without a word, the divine daughter landed on the floor and bowed. She said, "This useless Wu Yi has disappointed you, mother." Yunqi's eyes instantly turned as cold as ice. "And here I thought you were unaware." Shenwu Yi's voice sounded like that of a howling ghost from the depths. It was so terrifying that it shook everyone's soul strings. "Your opponent is just Diane Jiuzhi, an ignorant, arrogant, and worthless piece of garbage from Boundless, and you took this long to defeat him and even suffered some minor injuries. Do you know that he could wring out every drop of his smelly, filthy blood into a bowl, and it still would not be worth a single drop of yours?" Shenwu Yi bowed her head and replied, "Wu Yi knows she has erred." Around the palanquin, the women of Eternal Night were utterly silent. Their expressions were also unchanged, as if they had long gotten used to this sight. Shock, befuddlement, and disbelief appeared on everyone's faces in varying degrees. Then it all morphed into sighs of pity and regret. If Shenwu Yi had appeared in any other kingdom of God, she would have been cherished and even worshipped like a god. The Eternal Night Kingdom of God. The radiance so bright that it blinded even the Divine Regents was no more but a tool for the madwoman, Shenwu Yi, to vent her hatred at the world. You better, in the next battle of divine children, I expect you to crush all other divine sons in 10 breaths. Let these men who think themselves oh so noble and lofty know just how humble and cheap they really are. As you command, Shenwu Yi replied without hesitation. I will accept any punishment from you if I fail, mother. The other divine regents wore varying shades of ugliness on their faces. Shenwu Yi might be rebuking Shenwu Yi, but she was also humiliating the other 5 kingdoms of God at the same time. But what could they do? Out of everyone, the heavens had chosen to bless the madwoman and the isolated Eternal Night Kingdom of God. This term's Eternal Night Divine Daughter had undoubtedly surpassed the former #1 Divine Son, Diane Jiuzhi. Naturally, she had surpassed all other godbearers as well. The abyssal monarch continued to float in the air and observe everything in silence. Forget offering advice, he did not even speak a word. His expression looked as calm as an eternal ice peak, though hidden deep within his pupils were specks of dim light no one could understand. 1. Probably the greatest defeat he could ever receive in his life. From this point onward, only hell awaits. It's tragic. Daughters, your mood is in a state of disquiet, Li Xiu warned Yunqi. I know. Yunqi did not deny this. I just can't help but wonder what happened to her while she was in the abyss. Li Xiu sighed quietly. I know far too little about her, but a woman of glazed glass. As I mentioned before, she did not possess the pure aura of a woman of glazed glass, despite being capable of creating the glazed glass ice. At the very least, a woman of glazed glass would never exude coldness or indifference. However, now is not the time to find the answer to these questions, not to mention that you lost yourself to bloodthirst for an instant just now. Did you forget that Meng Kongchen is right next to you? If not for the fact that everyone's attention is on Shenwu Yi and Shenwu Yanai right now, there is a huge chance he would have discovered your odd emotion. This is the first time you made such a massive mistake since entering the abyss. Relax, Xianxia said. Even if I was found out, I know many excuses that can assuage his suspicion. He paused for a moment to calm himself before he stopped trying to defend himself. He admitted, okay, you're right, I'm acting rather pathetic today. You are not pathetic. On the contrary, you are acting more like Xianxia instead of the Emperor Yun. You constantly caution yourself to be countless times per day. Li Xiu's voice was exactly as soft and ephemeral as before, and yet it had temporarily stunned Xianxia. A short while later, he shook his head and let out an involuntary chuckle. Your words are quite warming. I'm sure it'll be quite effective against young and inexperienced women. It's too bad that I'm carrying a burden that makes the mere act of being myself in this world an unforgivable sin. In the future, I will make sure to watch myself closely. Li Xiu fell silent for a moment before speaking up once more. There is one more thing I need to warn you about. Hua Kaye has been staring at you for as long as you were staring at Shenwu Yi. Xianxia's heart skipped a beat. Not good. No matter how many times Xianxia warned himself to keep a clear head and fortify his mental defenses, he ultimately wasn't a soulless abyssal beast. Even in this unfamiliar universe, there were always things that could create a chink in his mental armor. Xia Qingyu was one such example. Luckily for him, Hua Kaye was too simple and unsophisticated. In the abyss, she was the easiest kind of person for him to handle. He closed his eyes for a short while as if he was pondering something. Then he suddenly opened his eyes, instinctively turned his head in Hua Kaye's direction, and coincidentally met her gaze. Right now, a thin, hazy layer of mist was covering Hua Kaye's pupils. It refracted her chaotic and indescribable feelings and panic. Xianxia lightly blinked at her before curving his mouth, looking away naturally, and looking in Diane Jia's direction. The one gaze and shallow smile were all it took to melt the tangled streams in Hua Kaye's heart and melt the icy mist shrouding her eyes. Soon, her pupils had returned to flawless stars. Hua Qingying had been perceiving Hua Kaye's emotions this whole time. It wasn't until now that she finally said, "The oddities displayed by Shenwu Yi are simply too stunning. Even your father and I cannot help but feel shaken by her. It is perfectly normal that Xianxia would stare at her. There is no need to act sensitive or brood over his actions." The sudden exposure of her true feelings caught Hua Kaye off guard and made her blush slightly. She hurriedly retorted, I was not. I know best how Big Brother Yun thinks of me. I wasn't brooding or anything. Don't try to start something when there is none, Aunt. I guess I sensed wrongly." "You did." Beside them, Hua Fuchen shook his head with a wry smile on his face. When he caught Diane Rahu dispelling the cold, plaguing Dian Jiuzhi out of the corner of his eye, that smile morphed into a hidden sigh. As the greatest divine regent of the 6 kingdoms of God, Diane Rahu's power was immense as a matter of course, not to mention that Dian Jiuzhi's cultivation was strong. It wouldn't take long for him to achieve a full recovery. Despite this, Dian Jiuzhi continued to support him carefully. It was at this moment that Dian Jiuzhi suddenly sensed a gaze stabbing his back like a needle. It was overtly invasive and absolutely careless, because the owner of the gaze wanted him to sense it. Dian Jiuzhi was second only to Dian Jiuzhi among the younger generation of the boundless kingdom of God, so of course, he could not allow such a taunt to slide unchallenged. His eyes turned sharp as he traced the source of the gaze and looked. His gaze immediately clashed against Xianxia's in midair. Xianxia narrowed his eyes slightly, and the corners of his mouth twitched almost imperceptibly. Then he very casually looked away from Dian Jiuzhi. Dian Jiuzhi's hands abruptly clenched tightly. It was because he could see the taunt in Xianxia's eyes and especially the soundless words he spoke. Trash. Dian Jiuzhi was in a fragile state right now. As a result, Dian Jiuzhi's sudden clenching of his fingers inflicted intense pain on him. He turned his head and asked, "What's wrong, Jiuzhi?" Dian Jiuzhi hurriedly relaxed his grip and forced a smile onto his face. "It's nothing, I just found it difficult to accept, that's all." He was gritting his teeth uncontrollably when he said the last few words. Diane Jiuzhi thought that Dian Jiuzhi could not accept the outcome of the fight and consoled him smilingly. My skill is inferior, so I lost. That is just how it is. As for the verbal humiliation I received, this is the lightless divine regent we're talking about. There is no need to pay it any heed. Dian Jiuzhi opened his mouth to explain, but this was the Pure Land. The divine regents and even the abyssal monarch were all present. He simply could not say a single word. It was at this moment that thorny gaze stabbed his heart once more. Violence brimmed in Dian Jiuzhi's eyes as he glared hatefully at Xianxia. Despite this, Xianxia showed no fear or surprise. On the contrary, the corners of his lips split even wider. The expression was soundless and wordless, but his scorn, disdain, contempt. It all poured right to the bottom of his soul. See, I stole his fiancée, Hua Kaye, and yet Dian Jiuzhi didn't even dare to make a peep. Trash, see. People call him the #1 divine son, but who's the one lying on the floor like a frozen dog? Trash, see. You know everything, and yet you didn't dare to do anything. Trash, #1 divine son, ha ha ha. More like the #1 coward of the kingdoms of God. In my eyes, he's nothing more than a laughingstock. All you can do is rage impotently. Then again, that's precisely the kind of behavior I would expect from trash like you. Want to know why you're worse than a stray dog? Because a stray dog would at least bark at their enemies. You and everyone around you don't. Dian Jiuzhi felt like fainting from sheer fury. The eye contact only lasted an instant, and yet Xianxia's gaze was so painful, so scornful. It wasn't even the contemptuous gaze of a person looking down on a weakling. It was a look of pity, one reserved only for a pitiful, pathetic worm. Such was Xianxia's contempt that the hatred that had never stopped scorching his inside took nearly all of his willpower to suppress, and almost burst through his lid. Dian Rahu suddenly side-eyed Dian Jiuzhi. His breathing had turned haggard and disorderly out of seemingly nowhere. Dian Jiuzhi sucked in a deep breath before bowing his head. No one had ever dared to humiliate Brother Jiuzhi so, Father. I simply... Dian Rahu withdrew his gaze and said heavily, a loser should have a loser's resolve. If you find this difficult to swallow, then work hard to return this humiliation 10 times over in the future. As for that madwoman from Eternal Night, you simply need to ignore her. Dian Jiuzhi responded affirmatively and stopped talking. He would not lift his head for a long, long time. Throughout this time, his teeth were clenched tight as a vice. Why is this happening? Even though the boundless kingdom of God is clearly the strongest kingdom of God. Even though Brother Jiuzhi was the former #1 divine son despite his defeat. Even though he did not do anything wrong. Even though he was tolerating and enduring this unimaginable indignity for everyone's sake. Even though Xianxia and Hua Kaye, Dreamweaver and Heaven Breaker were the ones in the wrong. Why, Brother Jiuzhi? Why are we the ones who are suffering such humiliation? Crack, crack. He could vaguely hear the sound of his teeth breaking under pressure. Meanwhile, Shenwu Yi had returned to the center of the barrier. However, no one challenged her even though she waited for a long time. So she cast her cold gaze at the Dreamweaver Kingdom of God group. I request your guidance, Dreamweaver Divine Son Meng Jiangxi. Meng Jiangxi expected this, and so did not panic in the slightest. He took a step forward and declared frankly, I have a high opinion of myself, but I'm well aware that I am absolutely no match for the boundless Divine Son, even assuming our cultivation levels were the same. Naturally, I would only be a worse match for you, Eternal Night Divine Daughter. Therefore, I will shamelessly offer my surrender. Meng Jiangxi's reply wasn't surprising at all. The exquisite, profound world that had no answer. The anomalous ice that overturned common sense. The only reasonable and not at all shameful answer to such overwhelming advantages was not to enter into a fight with Shenwu Yi in the first place. Ha 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 ha. Just as expected, a shrill, horrible laugh echoed throughout Eden's crown. Is this the divine son of the Dreamweaver Kingdom of God? A coward who doesn't even dare to answer a challenge. Are you all seriously going to pass down your kingdoms of God to such useless pieces of garbage? Meng Jiangxi replied indifferently. As expected of the lightless divine regent, you are the only one who would stoop to the level of insulting a junior. Under your leadership, I am sure that your kingdom of God will prosper and all of your citizens will rejoice. Shenwu Yi let out a cold cackle. A kingdom of God whose dreams are just as rotten as their reality, and a God-bearer who doesn't even dare to answer a challenge. In the future, the only place for the Dreamweaver Kingdom of God is beneath the feet of Eternal Night. So what makes you think you have any right to criticize my Eternal Night Kingdom of God? Meng Jiangxi's only response was to harumph lightly. The provocation had failed to ruffle his feathers even a little. Since Meng Jiangxi had admitted defeat, the only kingdom of God that hadn't entered the battlefield yet was Heaven-Breaker. Just when everyone thought that Hua Kaye would make the same choice as Meng Jiangxi, the beautiful, white figure of a young woman floated into the barrier and faced Shenwu Yi directly. Hua Fuchin subconsciously raised his hand. "Let her try," Hua Qingying interrupted him. "Kaylee's sword is good enough to face the exquisite, profound world." Hua Fuchin frowned a little until he recalled something. His eyes bloomed with barely disguised shock as he asked, "Are you saying that, Kaye?" Hua Qingying faced Hua Fuchin's obviously shaky gaze and nodded slightly. This was going to be her secret gift to you. She was also hoping that this trump card would win the favor of the Abyssal Monarch. She suddenly let out a quiet sigh and looked at the two people inside the barrier. She said in a sorrowful voice, "At the same cultivation level, she had a near 100% chance to defeat Dian Jiuzhi. Who would have thought that this brilliant yet anomalous eternal night divine daughter would appear out of nowhere? There is no way Kaye would get her wish now." "If she knows this, then why?" Hua Fuchin cut himself off halfway because the answer had already come to him. Sighing in amusement and helplessness, he said, "She's still a young girl after all. This is our first meeting. Heaven-Breaker divine daughter Hua Kaye requests your guidance." Inside the barrier, the two women were roughly 100 steps apart. They hadn't fought yet, but everyone was already holding their breath and staring blankly at the battlefield. Even the soft wind and the thin cloud had stopped in their tracks to watch. Shenwu Yi wore a plain outfit as black as ink. Icy mist seemed to be circling her clothes. Her fight against Diane Jiuzhi had disheveled her hair slightly and caused a few strands to hang limply beside her face, but it only made her look fairer and more gorgeous. Her eyes resembled frozen ponds. She looked as beautiful as an immortal's dream, but possessed no loveliness or charm whatsoever. There was only cold indifference, rejecting anything and everything. The icy, glazed glass aura slowly circulating around her gave her a sacred yet distant layer of light, making her look like a goddess of ice and snow who had descended from the 9 heavens. She looked beautifully sharp and lofty. On the other hand, Hua Kaye wore a snow-white outfit that symbolized her identity as the Heaven-Breaker divine daughter. 7 completely different sword radiances were sewn to her skirt, and they combined to form a complex yet gorgeous pattern of divinity and stars. They were Tianshu, Tiangshuan, Tianji, Tianquan, Yuheng, Kaiyang, and Yeaguang. The 7 shining stars symbolized the worship of the 7 Heaven-Breaker sword sovereigns. It also implied eternal protection. When she moved, her skirt swayed naturally. It looked like a galaxy of stars was pouring toward the floor, bright and colorful. Her countenance was famous throughout the abyss for a long, long time. She was a priceless treasure of the heavens, everyone knew. Her skin was fair and glossy like congealed lard. Her cheeks were slightly flushed, like the sunset glow. She looked as if neither the abyssal dust of the endless fog nor the ordinary dust of the mortal coil had ever touched her. Her eyebrows were curved like newly ascended new moons, and the brightest stars of the abyss were refracted within her beautiful pupils. Above all else, she exuded the frail purity unique to a young woman. They were both equally beautiful, though their personality and styles were utterly different. For them both to enter one's eyesight at the same time was an unthinkable luxury no one in all 6 kingdoms of God had ever experienced. Until now, outside the barrier, eyes went blank, expressions grew infatuated, and appearances were maintained by force. However, their overlapping breaths were so soft that they were almost inaudible, and their eyes seemed to have forgotten how to refract light. Even the holy land that was Eden's crown seemed to become colorless and lusterless all of a sudden. It is a little strange. Why is she entering the battlefield of her own accord? She is destined to lose, and Meng Jiangxi has already surrendered. I cannot imagine that there is any meaning to her response. Li Xiu expressed her doubts. Yun Qi tilted the corners of his lips before avoiding the question. Kaylee's Heaven-Breaker sword intent counters. Or should I say, is not afraid of the exquisite, profound worlds to a certain extent. However, the glazed glass ice makes it so that she has no chance of winning. Looking at the two women facing each other inside the barrier, Yun Qi felt a myriad of complicated emotions. One of them wore black, and the other white. One of them was cold and lofty like an icy fairy of the cold moon, and the other as pure and beautiful as a night-blooming flower in an ancient painting. In the eyes of others, obtaining even one of them was probably the greatest fortune a man could receive, a delusion that countless beings didn't even dare to entertain in their dreams. However, no one, not even Shenwu Yi or Hua Kaye themselves, knew that one of them was his wife, and the other his lover who had devoted her body and heart to him for eternity. Yunqi forcefully pushed aside the tangled mess in his head and focused on the present. This battle will not last long. When it is over, it will be my turn to enter the battlefield. He wasn't worried that Shenwu Yi would go to excessive lengths to harm Hua Kaye. After all, the lightless Divine Regents' malice was aimed at men only one. You, Li Suo looked confused. Although your name is known throughout the abyss, you are ultimately not the Dreamweaver Divine Son. How are you planning to participate? And why would you want to fight against her? You are overthinking this. I'm not planning to fight her. Out of the corner of his eye, Yunqi glanced at the abyssal monarch one time before looking away. I've experienced true loneliness before. That horrible feeling where there is absolutely nothing inside your heart, even though you are in the presence of others. And the abyssal monarch. His loneliness is probably countless times greater than what I experienced back then. Imagine a ghost walking alone in the endless dark year after year, a million years straight. If a beam of light suddenly pierces through the darkness and loneliness and appears before him, there is no way he can ignore it or keep quiet, no. Li Suo looked thoughtful. Shenwu Yi of the Eternal Night Kingdom of God is at the 6th level of the Divine Extinction Realm. Hua Kaye of the Heaven Breaker Kingdom of God is at the 2nd level of the Divine Extinction Realm. For this reason, Shenwu Yi must receive the Profound Rage Seal and equalize her cultivation level and profound energy to the level of Hua Kaye. The antique bronze-colored profound light from before appeared on the chief priest's palm once more. It flew past the barrier and landed on Shenwu Yi. The profound light stalled for an inexplicable instant the moment it made contact with Shenwu Yi. This caused the chief priest to furrow his brow a little. However, the moment passed so quickly that no one but the chief priest noticed it. The profound light bloomed into a small, sealing profound formation. A beat later, it vanished without a trace. Shenwu Yi's profound energy and aura began to weaken rapidly. Just 3 breaths later, they had declined all the way to the 2nd level of the Divine Extinction Realm. They were almost perfectly balanced with the profound energy surrounding Hua Kaye. Begin! The glass cloud sword rang crisply as it left its sheath, and a torrent of sword radiance resembling fireflies poured out and illuminated Hua Kaye. The next moment, the girl's air changed dramatically. The faint childishness residing at the bottom of her eyes quietly faded away, and a pair of cold stars gathered at the center of her pure, moon-like eyes. They were so sharp that one almost could not bear to look at them directly. Her appearance was as delicate as ever, but now it was entangled by a sharp sword intent that kept anything and everything at bay. Her snow-white outfit fluttered in a breeze even though it was windless inside the barrier, and the patterns on her skirt, both the sword patterns of the 7 stars and the divine patterns of celestial bodies, emitted fine powders of radiance. For a brief moment, everyone was dazed by the transformation. The Heaven-Breaker Divine Daughter had always been beautiful like a star from the beyond, but just the same, it felt like she would never mature. Now her appearance, if ever so slightly, reminded them of the sword fairy Hua Kaye. The light in the abyssal monarch's eyes flickered just a bit. Shenwu Yi raised her sword and kept the Heartless sword pointed diagonally at her feet. However, she did not make a move, much less summon the Glazed Glass Ice. Clearly, she was planning to give Hua Kaye the first move. The sword intent in Hua Kaye's eyes condensed into even sharper, colder stars. The fingers wrapped around the handle of the sword looked fair, slender, and long. When the energy around her fingers merged seamlessly with the light of the glass cloud sword, a pure, formless, and ethereal force field unfolded around her. 7 pale sword beams circled soundlessly around her person. The large majority of the spectators did not even notice when the sword beams had appeared. When Hua Kaye lifted her eyes slightly, delicate ripples suddenly appeared in the air, almost as if her gaze was cutting a path toward Shenwu Yi. She did not make a move, nor did her aura change in any way. However, a thin, white sword beam was already flying toward Shenwu Yi before most people noticed. Shenwu Yi did not move. The sword beam passed right through her, and stopped suddenly right as it was passing through her. The afterimage disappeared, and the real Shenwu Yi appeared to Hua Kaye's left. She was so close that Hua Kaye could literally touch her with her hand. Her anomalous appearance was, of course, the work of the exquisite, profound world. However, the instant Shenwu Yi appeared, another sword beam shone into her eyes. It was just a 1/6 of a meter away from her brow. Her appearance was unpredictable and instantaneous. Hua Kaye shouldn't have had the time to lock onto her with her spiritual sense after the spatial curve. And yet, the sword beam had taken flight almost immediately after she appeared beside the young woman. It was virtually as if the sword beam had been waiting for her. The attack was sudden, and there was almost no distance between them. Shenwu Yi was the one who was caught off guard. Unable to dodge it normally, Shenwu Yi had no choice but to perform a second spatial curve. Shred! The sword beam pierced empty air and left behind a pale scar that refused to fade even after a long, long time later. This time the real Shenwu Yi appeared above Hua Kaye to her right. But as if on cue, a pair of sword beams pincered her from two sides. Shenwu Yi had no time to raise her own sword. She just barely twisted out of the way of the two sword beams with inches to spare. However, another pair of sword beams followed right behind the attack, and the two sword beams she just dodged abruptly did a U-turn and flew toward her once more. Now she was facing a pair of sword beams, both from the front and the back. Shred! Shenwu Yi's afterimage was cut into pieces as the four sword beams shot through the air with ear-piercing shrieks. Alas, they had missed their mark. 3 kilometers away, Shenwu Yi reappeared and looked down at her right arm out of the corner of her eye. A shallow cut several inches long had split the fabric covering her right shoulder, exposing the skin that was fairer than snow beneath. At the same time, a bit of blood was seeping out of the small wound. There was a short silence. Then, the crowd erupted into a cacophony of noise. No one thought that the first exchange between the two women would result in Shenwu Yi's injury. After all, not even Diane Jiuzhi was able to inflict any external injury to the woman until the moment he lost. Is that the fabled Heaven-Breaker sword intent? Meng Jiangxi could not help but exclaim in surprise. I heard that the Heaven-Breaker divine daughter both completed her breakthrough and grasped the Heaven-Breaker sword intent at the end of her journey 3 years ago. However, Uncle was sure it was just a false rumor because not even Senior Sword Fairy was able to grasp the Heaven-Breaker sword intent at the same age. To think that the outlandish rumor is true, and from the looks of it, she is already very familiar with it. She doesn't look like a beginner at all. Yun Qi stared straight ahead without a word. Meng Kongqun said in an indifferent voice, most people in the abyss know that the Heaven-Breaker sword intent of the Heaven-Breaker kingdom of God could turn an opponent's profound energy as fragile and breakable as paper. But few know that its greatest strength lies in the fact that the sword beam it creates automatically gains its own spiritual perception. As someone who had fought Hua Fuchin many times in the past, Meng Kongqun was among the few who had the deepest understanding of the Heaven-Breaker sword intent. An ordinary, profound practitioner perceives their enemy using their spiritual perception. But a Heaven-Breaker profound practitioner produces swords that will automatically lock onto their opponent. Therefore, this outcome is unsurprising. Meanwhile, the 7 sword beams had returned to Hua Kaye's side. Throughout the exchange, the young woman's feet had not moved a single inch. This scene stunned most of the spectators as a matter of course. As members of the 6 kingdoms of God, they still remembered the stunning evaluation the cold and strict chief priest had afforded Hua Qingying to this day. He had called her the most talented person in the way of the sword in the history of the 6 kingdoms of God, and perhaps the only one in the current abyss who could become a true god without an inheritance. Hua Qingying was a one-of-a-kind sword fairy, and yet even she took 77 years to grasp the first wisp of Heaven-Breaker sword intent. On the other hand, Hua Kaye. Ding. There was a soft ring, and a burst of piercing cold chased away all of the distractions. When the crowd looked, they saw that Shenwu Yi had encased the Heartless sword in a thin layer of icy light. The anomalous, practically demonic glazed glass barrier had appeared around her person as well. Shenwu Yi had not summoned the glazed glass ice this early when Dian Jiuzhi was her opponent. At this point, the noises died completely. Everyone was holding their breath and waiting to see if the Heaven-Breaker divine daughter's Heaven-Breaker sword intent could cut through the glazed glass barrier that even Dian Jiuzhi, with his 2-level advantage, was unable to break until the last moment. To everyone's surprise, Hua Kaye declared, I am no match for you. Her words sounded like surrender, but her voice was bitingly cold like spring water. There was none of the self-abasement or weakness one might expect from a declaration of surrender either. On the contrary, unyielding determination suddenly flooded into her demeanor and bearing, so much so that it almost felt ruthless. My only chance in victory lies with this sword. If you manage to withstand it, then I will surrender. Xiang. The glass cloud sword suddenly started shaking slightly and ringing, as if it were holding back something. Hua Kaye's eyes grew focused. He wanted to witness the massive, pleasant surprise Hua Kaye had prepared for him with his own eyes. To know just how brilliant the Heaven Breaker third sword she had picked up from the 7-star Heaven Breaker formation could shine. Shenwu Yi was expressionless. She did not act immediately either. Xianxia. The glass cloud sword suddenly vibrated much more violently than before and emitted a terrible ringing that could pierce even metal and stone. Hua Kaye's snow-white face was scrunched up with concentration, and the sword light in her eyes shone so bright they resembled supernovas. Above all, it was dyed with a kind of ruthless determination that would sever it all. The profound energy and sword energy around her person began shaking. Her snow-white clothes began fluttering in the air. The 7-star sword patterns and starry divine patterns on her skirt were all shining brightly as well. The way they flickered erratically looked both gorgeous and unsettling. A deep frown suddenly appeared on Shenwu Yi's face. It was because she suddenly felt as if a sword was pressed against her heart and soul. It was a soul-restricting sensation that no words could describe and seemed almost ludicrous, except that she could clearly feel that this sword had locked onto her very heart and soul. There would be no escape, no matter what she did. For every passing breath, the sword's light was growing brighter. For every passing instant, its power was swelling at an unbelievable rate. It eventually got to the point where her heart and soul were growing colder with every passing second. In response, she crossed her sword in front of herself and stacked up multiple layers of glazed glass ice. Hua Kaye frowned in confusion at first. Then the blood suddenly drained from her face. "Kaye, stop!" The sudden cry made everyone look to the side. To their shock, it had come from the sword fairy Hua Kaye. A cyan figure dashed forward, and Hua Kaye was standing right in front of the barrier. They had never heard her sound so urgent before. "Do not be reckless, Kaye. Stop now, Kaye." At this point, everyone was wide-eyed with shock. Anyone who heard of the sword fairy automatically knew that Hua Kaye was her one and only reverse scale. And the only thing that could cause her to lose her cool like this was a threat to her life. Hua Kaye must have sensed something as well, for he too appeared beside Hua Kaye in an instant without any regard for time and place. His pupils were contracting at the same rate as Hua Kaye's sword beam was strengthening. He initially thought that Hua Kaye was preparing the Heaven Breaker third sword, but he was wrong. It was the fourth. If she had shown this to him outside a battlefield, then he would be beyond delighted that Hua Kaye had glimpsed the path to the Heaven Breaker fourth sword. But right here and now, sensing her shaky sword aura and unnaturally violent sword intent, all he felt was indescribable shock and terror. She obviously hadn't mastered the Heaven Breaker fourth sword, or she would have informed Hua Kaye about it in excitement. Not only that, but the skill burns a tremendous amount of profound energy. Considering that she was only at the second level of the Divine Extinction realm, she would barely be able to unleash one strike, if at all. If she ignored the consequences and pushed herself to the limit, her opponent would suffer a terrible blow, but she would hurt herself worse. Hua Kaye did not respond to her aunt's cries at all, but not because she chose to ignore her warning. It was because her heart, will, and soul were focused entirely on creating the sword intent, and she could not spare any of it for her surroundings. The chief priest lifted his head and summoned an impossibly powerful barrier that blocked Hua Kaye and Hua Kaye's path. At the same time, a warning that would not accept defiance as an answer boomed. "Withdraw! No one is to interfere with the battle." As the white light of the glass cloud sword kept growing stronger, bits and pieces of white light gradually took form. They slowly and painstakingly fought through the rampaging sword aura and gathered around the sword like fireflies. Slowly, a pale white sword projection about 23 meters long took form. The instant it appeared, the surrounding space distorted violently, and fine cracks began spreading rapidly. This sight caused countless profound practitioners to gasp. The space of Eden's crown was unbelievably tough, and yet Hua Kaye's level 2 Divine Extinction realm profound energy had clearly damaged it. It did not take a genius to know that the power of this sword completely exceeded what she should be able to dish out at her level. However, Hua Kaye and Hua Kaye's panicked states made it clear to even the most inexperienced and ignorant person in this room that Hua Kaye's sword, as terrifyingly powerful as it was, also came with an equally terrible cost. Everyone was stunned, shocked, and confused. Out of everyone present, the Heaven Breaker Divine Daughter was easily the most averse to combat of them all. This was her first meeting with Shenwu Yi, so there was no possibility that a grudge existed between the two of them. The battle of divine children, while important, only concerned the face of some kingdoms of God and the promise of the abyssal monarch. It did not involve the kingdoms of God or even the God-bearer's core interests at all, so why was she going so far? Right now, Dian Jiuzhi could barely conceal his panic. He had struggled out of Dian Sansi's arms and staggered forward. Eyes staring at Hua Kaye, his mouth opened and closed unconsciously like a fish. More than once, he had nearly lost control and cried out to her. Yunqi's face remained calm and unruffled, but his chest was clearly inflating and deflating a tad faster than before. Shenwu Yi's sword was swiftly gathering glazed glass ice as well. By the time she pointed the ruthless sword forward, dozens of small, delicate, and translucent ice lotuses were covering the thin, long blade. Though the icy auras they gave off were anything but harmless, seemingly cold enough to freeze even gazes. Amidst the dazzling sword lights, Hua Kaye finally and slowly opened her beautiful eyes. Shining out of her eyes was the pure and translucent radiance of a young girl, and a kind of pure determination that no one could understand. The mixture and entanglement of countless sword lights and sword stars were suffocatingly gorgeous, and yet they were also bitingly destructive. Wreathed in the sword projection, Hua Kaye thrust the glass cloud sword forward. At that moment, all sound ceased to exist, and Hua Qingying let out a painful sigh. She knew very well that Hua Kaye would suffer severe injuries the second the power was unleashed. However, this was Eden's crown, and there was nothing she could do to stop this from happening. She could only protect her when instant victory and defeat were decided. Shenwu Yi also thrust out her sword at the same time, her blade following a perfectly straight trajectory, and the ice lotuses blooming with dazzling yet bleak radiance. The world fell completely silent, and everyone forgot to breathe. Time seemed to flow slowly as countless pupils dilated to the max. The two women's reflections were clearly imprinted in their eyes as the sword projection and the icy radiance moved closer and closer, and finally overlapped with each other at a certain point in time. The world was still deathly silent. There was no icy explosion, no spatial cut, not even the ear-piercing clash of profound energy. Instead, a white figure appeared between Hua Kaye and Shenwu Yi. With his left finger, he touched the glass cloud sword. With his right finger, he tapped the Heartless sword. The sword projection, icy lotuses, and even the profound energies gushing out of the girls' bodies vanished in an instant. It was as if an invisible hand had erased everything from existence but left no traces behind. 1. Fool. 2. To be honest, I really wanted to use, what sorcery is this? During the previous chapters, and here I wanted to use sorceress. However, ATG is one of those books where the natural sound translation almost always comes back to bite you in the ass, which is why I try to stay as literally accurate as possible for some terms. Just a little insight to how I translate this novel. Gods, no one dared to break the rules of the Pure Land, including the Divine Regents of the 6 Kingdoms of God. However, there was one exception, one man whose very existence sat above all of the rules. He was the Abyssal Monarch, the Heaven-Breaker sword that Hua Kaye poured all of her willpower into, the glazed glass ice that Shenwu Yi used to crush Dian Jiuzhi. All disappeared without a trace like a bubble. While everyone was staring at him with a dumb expression, he slowly lowered his hands and said, "The body is exquisite, and the heart creates glazed glass. This is unprecedented in the history of the world, a miracle bestowed by the heavens themselves. Kaye, you have glimpsed the true intent of the Heaven-Breaker fourth sword despite only being in your 20s. In terms of talent in the way of the sword alone, you did not just surpass your aunt. You are not far away from my level when I was your age." The Abyssal Monarch's intervention didn't just surprise the 6 Kingdoms of God. The chief priest was greatly astonished as well. His evaluation of Shenwu Yi and Hua Kaye especially exploded in their hearts like thunderclaps. He had called Shenwu Yi a miracle and compared Hua Kaye to himself. If either one of you suffers even a tiny amount of damage, it will be a great loss to this world. So let us end this here, shall we? Shenwu Yi calmly put away her sword and bowed to him. "Wu Yi obeys, your majesty." Hua Kaye's adaptability was slightly weaker than Shenwu Yi's, and she did not fear him like most others did. So she remained speechless for a good few seconds before she finally mumbled, "But, Uncle Abyssal Monarch, the favor." The Abyssal Monarch's pupils seemingly shifted slightly in Hua Kaye's direction and smiled. "Both of your performances are enough for me to make an exception. I will grant you both my favor." The Abyssal Monarch's words did not move Shenwu Yi in any way, but countless brilliant stars lit up in Hua Kaye's eyes. Real. Really, thank you, Uncle Abyssal Monarch. You're the best, Uncle Abyssal Monarch. She was standing next to the Abyssal Monarch on a battlefield at Eden's Crown. And yet her joy was so direct, strong, and truthful. Dian Jiuzhi closed his eyes to conceal his disappointment. He also let out a sigh in his heart. Suddenly, he understood why Hua Kaye had done something that wasn't just against common sense, but also her own nature. Why she threw everything into this fight, even at the risk of greatly injuring herself. It was all to obtain the Abyssal Monarch's favor, a favor that was tied to her and Yun Qi's future. Hua Fuchen let out a long, long sigh of relief. It was only now that she realized that his back was ice cold. It was because his shirt was completely drenched in cold sweat. Hua Kaye was still brimming with joy. She looked completely different from when she was wielding a sword. She had transformed from a sharp and intimidating little sword fairy to a spoiled young girl in an instant. Looking at Shenwu Yi, Hua Kaye said frankly, "There is no need to end this battle here. I surrender. Even if I throw everything into this attack, I know that my chance of victory is only 1%. There is a 99% chance you would have one eternal night divine daughter." The Abyssal Monarch smiled but did not comment on it. The chief priest did not waste his breath as usual. He declared, "Hua Kaye of Heaven Breaker surrenders. Shenwu Yi of Eternal Night wins." During this battle of divine children, Shenwu Yi of Eternal Night and Hua Kaye of Heaven Breaker performed splendidly. His Majesty approves of their performance and decides to make an exception for them. Both of them will receive a favor from His Majesty. The Abyssal Monarch's promise and the chief priest's declaration sounded the end of this battle between divine children. Including Pan Buweng, a total of 6 divine sons and 2 divine daughters had participated in the battle. However, it was the 2 divine daughters who achieved the ultimate victory, and the 6 divine sons were their foils. This was especially true for the former #1 divine son, Dian Jiuzhi. Shenwu Yi's icy light had almost completely wiped out his former honor and glory. This outcome stunned everyone belonging to the kingdoms of God. When Hua Kaye put away the glass cloud sword and turned around, her vision suddenly blurred, and she nearly collapsed to the floor. However, a cyan figure caught her before she could do so. When Hua Kaye found herself in Hua Qingying's embrace, she finally noticed that she was exhausted from head to toe. It was to the point where she could barely lift her arms. Hua Fuchen was right behind Hua Qingying. When he saw the terribly pale complexion but beaming smile on his daughter's face, he ultimately could not bring himself to rebuke her. He could only curse inside his head. "It's all that brat's fault." Meanwhile, Hua Qingying was carefully inspecting Hua Kaye's condition with her profound energy. It wasn't until she had scanned her whole body that she relaxed. The Abyssal Monarch's well-timed intervention had prevented the Heaven Breaker 4th sword from unleashing, so it ultimately did not backfire on Hua Kaye. However, it still taxed her far too much to create the sword, which was why she was in a state of severe physical and mental exhaustion right now. If Hua Kaye had unleashed the sword in her current state, Hua Qingying did not dare to imagine the outcome. She quickly carried Hua Kaye and brought her back to the Heaven Breaker Kingdom of God's formation. At the same time, the 7 Heaven Breaker sword sovereigns rushed forward and surrounded Hua Kaye in 7 gentle sword energies. They restored her depleted energies and aura at an astonishing rate. "You will not do anything like this in the future." Despite his wavering resolve, Hua Fuchen ultimately found it in himself to rebuke her. "I get it, father. I won't do this in the future." Hua Kaye replied obediently and modestly, but pride quickly took over as she declared, "But you can't deny that I succeeded thanks to this sword." She admitted her mistake in a single sentence, only to undermine him in the next. Hua Fuchen covered his face with one hand before shooting the distant Yun Qi a glare. Hua Qingying said indifferently, "Besides obtaining the Abyssal Monarch's favor, are you sure you're not thinking about anything else when you throw all caution to the wind?" "Nope." Hua Kaye looked away and adamantly refused to admit anything. It was at this moment that Sha Xing finally returned from outside. He was confused when he saw the strange scene. Xianxia said slowly, "The battle of divine children is over. Shenwu Yi defeated Dian Jiuzhi, Meng Jiangxi refused to fight and surrendered, and the Abyssal Monarch himself personally stopped Shenwu Yi and Hua Kaye's fight. After promising to make an exception and bestow both of them his favor, Hua Kaye surrendered the fight." His explanation was short, but it was enough to stack multiple layers of shock on Sha Xing's face. It would be a long, long time before he recovered his senses. It was only now that Xianxia Yi unhurriedly produced a profound imagery stone and handed it to Sha Xing. "I've already engraved everything you missed. You should thank me for my foresight. Otherwise, you would have missed some of the most astounding scenes that have ever taken place in the history of the Abyss." On the boundless Kingdom of God's side, Dian Rahu was stroking his long beard with obvious approval and a wide smile. The rage that gripped him after Dian Jiuzhi was humiliated following his defeat seemed to have been entirely forgotten. "Kaylee seems so gentle and mild-tempered in the norm. I didn't think she had it in her to go so far for Jiuzhi's honor, not to mention that her sword talent surpasses even King Ying. As expected of my daughter-in-law, Hua. The man was laughing happily when he reached the end of his sentence. He did not notice that Dian Sansi wore a dark, ugly expression behind his back. "Brother Jiuzhi?" He cautiously shot Dian Jiuzhi a look. He wanted to say something to comfort his brother, but he could not think of anything. However, Dian Jiuzhi shook his head and cracked a faint smile. That smile looked like letting go. The more he acted like this, the more Dian Sansi's heart ached. Eventually, it grew so painful that he could barely suppress his reaction. Without thinking, he turned to look at Yun-Chi. To his surprise, their gazes, coincidentally, clashed once more. Yun-Chi's eyebrows were curving downward, and the corners of his mouth were turning upward. He was smiling with ridicule, arrogance, and disdain. Right after that, Yun-Chi casually turned away from Dian Sansi, as if looking at him for even a second longer was a waste of his time and energy. However, right as his face turned, Dian Sansi clearly saw Yun-Chi's mouth opening and closing. The word he said without making a sound was pitiful. "At number %." At that moment, every drop of blood inside his body rushed into his head. Dian Sansi's face and neck turned completely red, like he was drenched in blood, and even his vision was a blurry haze of red. The desire to divulge everything so that father would fly into an unholy rage. The abyssal monarch would enact divine judgment, and Yun-Chi and Hua Kaye would lose everything threatened to implode his heart from the inside. He recalled the consequences of such an action and Dian Jiuzhi's warning, which sounded more like pleading. A good few breaths later, he finally clenched his teeth and mastered himself. The humiliation, the rage, the hatred, the reluctance. Bit by bit, he forced it all down to throat level. That was all he could do. Even with all his willpower, his throat was as far as he could shove down the emotions. Although he was keeping his emotions at bay, there was just no way he could swallow them like he had done so many times before. As a result, all this rage, humiliation, and hatred were lodged in his throat like a million fish bones. It felt so uncomfortable that every breath felt like a year. This was a kind of pain and torture he never imagined could exist until now. "He's almost at the limit of his limit," Yun-Chi said leisurely inside his soul. "Dian Sansi?" Li Xiu asked. "Yes," Yun-Chi replied. "Right now, even a simple poke could potentially cause him to explode. A strong stimulation, his reason would be obliterated, and he would self-destruct no matter the time, place, or circumstance." Li Xiu whispered, "The battle of divine children is already over. The opportunity you need will be given to me by the abyssal monarch himself. Who knows, he might even be more desperate than I am." Li Xiu. The abyssal monarch waited until Hua Kaye was sufficiently recovered before asking, "So what is your desired reward, Kaye?" Smiling, Hua Kaye paid him a bow before declaring fearlessly, "My desired reward is a little special, Uncle Abyssal Monarch. Can I tell you about it in private?" The abyssal monarch smiled. "Of course. However, aren't you worried that this lone one would go back on his word without a witness?" "You wouldn't. Thank you in advance, Uncle Abyssal Monarch." Hua Kaye saluted him again before stepping behind Hua, King Ying with a smile on her face. Next, the abyssal monarch shifted his gaze to Shenwu Yi. "What is your desired reward, Shenwu Yi?" Shenwu Yi replied quickly and succinctly, "Your Majesty, Wu Yi would like to enter the forbidden zone of slumbering gods." Her words surprised everyone. An unnatural shockwave of profound energy washed out of the pitch-black palanquin where the lightless Divine Regent was residing, and it was mixed with all too obvious anger. Clearly, Shenwu Yi's request had gone against her wishes. "The forbidden zone of slumbering gods? What kind of place is that?" Yun-Chi asked with a frown. It had been 3 years since he arrived at the Dreamweaver Kingdom of God. Although he was mainly focused on collecting information regarding the divine children of the kingdoms of God, he knew more or less everything that was necessary to know about the Abyss. However, this was the first time he heard this name. Meng Jiangxi answered in a hushed voice, "It is the place where the ancient gods perished after falling into the Abyss, before the abyssal world was formed." "It is," also the place the Abyssal Monarch landed when he first fell into the abyss. It is rumored that most of the true gods and demon gods who perished at the very beginning were corrupted by primal abyssal dust and transformed into abyssal ghosts. Later, after the Abyssal Monarch had created the abyssal world, the graveyard of gods was sealed and named the Forbidden Zone of Slumbering Gods. I have never gone to the Forbidden Zone of Slumbering Gods before, so I know very little about it. But according to the records of the Xuanji Hall, the concentration of abyssal dust in the Forbidden Zone of Slumbering Gods is comparable to the inner regions of the Endless Fog, despite not being situated in the Endless Fog. Besides that, it contains far more abyssal ghosts than abyssal beasts, and every abyssal ghost could be an ancestor or a god of the denizens of the current abyss. The Abyssal Monarch probably sealed the region and named it a Forbidden Zone out of respect to everyone's ancestors and gods. If I remember correctly, the place was opened less than 20 times since it was made a Forbidden Zone. Yunqi asked, "In that case, why would Xiuya waste such a precious opportunity to travel to such a place?" Meng Jiangxi thought for a moment before answering, "Countless ancient true gods have met their end in that place. Considering their divinity, not even primal abyssal dust should be able to eliminate them immediately. Perhaps they had left behind inheritances or extraordinary treasures prior to their deaths, and Shenwu Yi is interested in them." Meng Jiangxi's reply was hesitant and slow. Clearly, he was just guessing. The Abyssal Monarch fell silent, but the silence only lasted 2 breaths. He nodded. "As you wish. However," he added, "the Forbidden Zone of Slumbering Gods only opens once in a very, very long time. It would be a waste to open it for just one person." Zhaiyuan. The first knight, Dugu Zhaiyuan, stepped forward to receive his order. "Open the void-breaching formation to the Forbidden Zone of Slumbering Gods 20 hours later. Every kingdom of God is allowed to dispatch 1 junior into the place." The other 5 kingdoms of God were visibly delighted by the Abyssal Monarch's order. Not only was he bestowing them a gift, he was subtly making them owe Shenwu Yi one. "Thank you for granting my favor, Your Majesty." Shenwu Yi had no objections to offer. She did not seem pleased that her desire was granted either. She withdrew in silence and indifference to where she had been. The Abyssal Monarch had made his announcements. The eternal Pure Land was right around the corner, and the battle of divine children had reached its end. Now, it was time for the Abyssal Monarch to take his leave, and the chief priest to announce the end of this term's Pure Land meet. But against all expectations, the Abyssal Monarch cast his gaze at the Dreamweaver Kingdom of God's formation. Then he said, "Kongchen, this lone one heard that another perfect God-bearer besides Kaye has descended to your Kingdom of God. Is this true?"